So, hello everyone and welcome to the first day of the Software-Defined Space Company. I'm here with Tomas Hrozensky of the European Space Policy Institute. Thomas, you just chaired a session about new space policy initiatives. Can you tell us a little bit about the topics that we found in new space initiatives?
Sure, happy to be here with you, Remco. The session was really to focus on policymaking, strategy development at the level of public actors, and at the level of public actors looking ahead, looking maybe 10, 15 years in the future, under an underlying narrative. What is it that Europe needs? What is it that should improve in Europe's approach to space? What should our collective ambition in space be in this kind of a longer time frame, considering that there are developments both within Europe but also outside Europe that are maybe changing the way how we should think about space and how we should approach our policy that is related to space, which does not necessarily need to be only space policy, but is also about other policy domains and potentially also about other business sectors that can or should, and we hope they would, buy in space solutions, space technology, space data and services more in the future.
So who were your panelists? You had someone from ESA and you had someone from the Estonian government.
That's right. The panel included the perspectives from ESA member state, so that was Paul Lias from the Estonian Ministry of Economic Affairs and Communications, and the ESA perspective provided by Kai-Uwe Schrögl from ESA. Interestingly, you can make the argument that if you look at how does the composition of a consolidated European space budget look like, you can say that we've had the representation on the panel, which really is the majority of where the money either comes from, which are the nations, European nations, member states of EU and ESA, and on the other hand, where most of that European consolidated space budget is being implemented either through national programs or collectively through ESA. So in that sense, I think it was a relevant discussion on what can Europe do future in space.
Okay, now Kai-Uwe mentioned something interesting. He mentioned a key word, confidence. He was confident about the future of space in Europe. What did he mean?
Well, there are strengths and there are achievements that Europe can be proud of, and no one can really challenge that. If you look at the European approach to space and how the programs and the initiatives developed, we in Europe can be proud of the excellence in space applications, in space science, and we are developing many other domains. Europe is really active on all the fronts. However, since you mentioned the discussions in the panel, that is one part of that conversation. And the other part of that conversation is that we should also be looking at how and realistically we can look now what can we do better in space. One clear example in that regard, which could be, and maybe can take the opportunity to refer some of the work that my organization ESPI has produced. It's really assess, can Europe be actually considered as a full-fledged space power? And in our research, and that research really went into almost 100 individual indicators, we have concluded that there are areas where Europe is trailing behind. So while it has some element, as the theorists would say, space power, there is still a pathway how it can and should in the future become a full-fledged space power. I think there is a question of ambition, so what is in the European ambition that we can improve. And you've heard it in the panel discussions, we were also trying to understand and also leverage the audience in this room. How can we foster and strengthen the high-level political buy-in into space? And I think this is also a question that transcends this conference. In Europe we have a rather well-developed space community, a space bubble, but how can we venture beyond that? And that pathway, and it is also the job of ESPI as Europe's space think tank, to target how we can go beyond, how we can really make the case of space in other audiences, specifically the policymakers and the policymakers that are not necessarily only dealing with space.
Okay, that's interesting. Paul Lias mentioned that it's not necessarily a question of funding, of money. We always talk about funding. Kai-Uwe said it. Let's not talk about funding because the funding is there, but it is how we spend that money is the question. What was said about that?
I think it's both. you implement the ambition based on what you are able to put on the table for the implementation. And I still would argue there is a room for improvement for Europe when it comes to its ambition and expenditure, public expenditure on space. And your second point is precisely right. One of the discussions which we've had in the panel was exactly about that, how it is spent or where it is actually being put. An example which we can introduce in that regard is that if you look at the global space budget, it appears that most of the majority of that spending originates in defense, in security, in military, and intelligence focused budgetary envelopes in different countries. And we see here, and that was also the discussion during the panel, that space is essential for Europe's security, for the security of Europe's citizens, economies, and societies, and understanding the environment, the geopolitical environment in which we are currently faced. Needless to say, this in Estonia specifically. This is a big policy question for the future, and I'm also pleased to see that Europe is accelerating its effort through national developments, through its actions, through EU actions. But in my view, this should still improve, especially in the realm of ambition and a framing of cooperation.
Okay, we're being kicked off stage. We're moving to the next element, but thank you very much, Tomas, for chairing this interesting panel and showing us some of the insights and some of the future. And again,
this was the point. Think of the future and what should improve. And,
exactly. And we can be confident about the future.
Confident, but wary about how we do in a global competition.
Of course.
As Europe. And that would be my last word.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Tomas.
Thanks. Thank you, Remco.